Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about something that maybe won't seem very important, but actually kind of is, and it will affect us all, and that is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Um, and it deals a lot with Twitter, Facebook, and it's finding itself more in the spotlight now because of Trump, being angry and choosing to go after it. So I want to kind of explain what it is and how it will affect you each, and what that really entails. Breaking it down to is the government cannot restrict free speech. Most people seem to think that restricts other people from free speech, specifically Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, basically saying that I can put whatever I want up there and they can't restrict it because I have First Amendment rights. Facebook, Google, Apple, Twitter, I mean, Twitter's not as big, but they, as large as they may seem, they're not government entities, they're private companies. So what you put on Facebook, Twitter, choose to share with people, Instagram, you're not guaranteed First Amendment rights in those forums. So to get one sticking point out of the way now, Facebook, Twitter can restrict your speech. They choose not to mostly, but don't consider yourself to be having your constitutional rights restricted because of what they choose to block, take down, or restrict. They have their own terms of service and guidelines. What we will get into with Section 230 touches on those. But again, this is not related to the First Amendment. So if you're thinking Facebook, Twitter has to leave your stuff up because of your First Amendment rights, you might want to think again. That's not covered by this law. Now, as far as what Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is, and you can see the specific verbiage on the screen, but what it says, and I'll read it for you here, is that 1. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided. So what that means is that what you put up on Twitter, what you put up on Instagram, what you put up on Facebook, or even the comment section of your favorite website, be it something like Fox News, CNN, those entities, what you put in the comments section, they are not legally responsible for. That doesn't make them the publisher or make them basically speaking for you. The information you put on those sections and on those websites is yours and yours alone, and they don't become a publisher or affiliated with that. So anything you put up that leads to a lawsuit protects them from being sued for your content. The second part that's important about this, Section 230 is that Facebook and Twitter can't be legally held liable if they take an action in good faith to restrict or basically censor content. And that's where this is becoming a big issue right now. If you were unaware, recently, as I believe it was last week, might have been 2 weeks ago, Trump put on Twitter complaining about mail-in ballots, explaining how they would be, it leads to great voter fraud, basically declared a statement that mail-in voting equals voter fraud. Twitter flagged those as saying it needs fact-checked. Here's information about mail-in ballots. And of course, Trump being Trump is, he immediately reacted saying they're restricting speech and he was going to take executive order action to prevent that. The problems we're going to run into, there's multiple. Firstly, again, they're private companies. It's their job to make sure that their services can expand and cater to everybody. So by them fact-checking, they're trying to avoid the spotlight that Facebook got put into during the election, where they didn't take down a lot of what legitimately was fake news, and they were blamed for a lot of disinformation and election interference. So to avoid being put in that spotlight and saying they're not doing enough, they need to be able to restrict and or put labels, fact-checked, which we've seen Facebook, Twitter try to do, and because of Section 230, they're legally allowed to. If we make an argument and change it to in good faith and try to restrict that, we're going to see one of two things. Either they're going to completely avoid censoring anything, fact-checking anything, to avoid losing their basically exempt from publisher rights, or they're going to overly restrict, and we're going to see a lot of things flagged, and there's going to be outrage either way. So there's no good way to have this handled, and what that's ultimately going to lead to, because of fear of being overly restrictive or under restrictive, is that these platforms can't exist. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, YouTube, owned by Google, none of them are going to take on the responsibility that what people put on their platforms is going to pass liability onto them. So somebody puts on there something, violent, racist, sexist, and they restrict it, and somebody finds a court they can prove that it wasn't done in good faith, they now lose their first protections, and they're now liable for everything put on their platforms. So without these protections, these platforms don't exist. Now the problem with that is I've seen people basically say, well, wouldn't the world be better off without these platforms? Not really. Say what you want about social media, media in general. They've done much more good than they have bad. For instance, we wouldn't know anything about Trump if it wasn't for Twitter. In his presidency, they got rid of the press briefings for the most part. You get no information, and the only way he chooses to disseminate his information or even talk to the public, apart from Fox and Friends, is on Twitter. So what he doesn't realize is, with this executive order, if he destroys Twitter, he's losing his entire platform. And Trump without Twitter just doesn't make sense. He can't stay off of it, for better or worse, for his presidency, and without it, he'd be gone. Another issue is we got hit with this pandemic, and gatherings were prohibited. We couldn't communicate with people. So where did we turn? We turned to social media. We need these platforms, and you can use need loosely if you choose to, but what they allow us to do is communicate in a way that beforehand doesn't exist, at least not in a platform like this. So the argument that we're better off without social media falls on its head when you realize how much we actually use it for. There, of course, are a lot of poor uses for it. For instance, I unfollowed half of my friends list because of the protest, the pandemic. We're seeing what people are like, so it's not all great things, but those platforms are part of our society now. They may be too big, and that's a different argument, but to say that they should be gone, which is what could happen and probably would happen if we remove Section 230, it's not a future that you really want to see, no matter what you may think in an instant. So I know this was kind of long, but I think it's important to understand what 230 is, how it affects you, how it will affect our life, and understanding, because it doesn't really get a lot of exposure right now due to the pandemic, due to the social unrest, which, don't get me wrong, are much, I won't say more important, but from a basic human rights standpoint, they are much more important and deserve more attention. But things like this can't be forgotten. So I do encourage you to read a little bit more about how 230 does affect your life, what its revocation or modification could do to social media, the internet in general, and just keep yourself informed. So if something does change, you understand where this is coming from, how it happened, and what's going on. So thanks for coming back, and I will see you next week. Thanks, guys.